Hey everyone, it's Horror Free for All, and I hope you're doing well today. Today I have a review of a table reading of a long lost Tales from the Crypt Presents movie script of a film that never actually got made, sadly. And the film in question is Dead Easy. Now, Dead Easy, in case you don't know anything about this movie, was actually at one point going to be the second Tales from the Crypt Presents movie. At the end of the first film of the franchise, known as Demon Knight, after the credits rolled, there was a name drop of the next film in question's title, which was Dead Easy. And this script, supposedly, according to How Not to Make a Movie's podcast, which actually features a prominent producer of the Tales from the Crypt television show back in the day, A.L. Katz, and in his conversations with Gilbert Adler, who was also a fellow producer on the show, have confirmed that Dead Easy was the official script that they picked to be the second film in their intended 3 movie deal with Universal to make Tales from the Crypt Presents films as like feature-length spin-off episodes, so to speak, for the franchise. So the story goes in the testimony that the two producers had on their podcast. If you're looking for this, I'm actually going to share you an entire video for you to get some background from their own mouths on this, as well as the entire table reading, so you can get caught up to speed before you go any further in this video, so that way you know the full context here. But so the story goes, after Demon Knight had wrapped up filming, they immediately wanted to look at scripts before Demon Knight was finalized. At one point, as we know from historical accounts, From Dusk Till Dawn was optioned to them, but was taken away very quickly. According to Quentin Tarantino, they wanted to make too many changes for his liking for his script for that movie, so he took it over to Miramax, and the rest is history there. We also know of another movie called The Frighteners, which was more of Robert Zemeckis' recruiting going on there, working with a then relatively unknown director, Peter Jackson. And Zemeckis decided to make The Frighteners its own movie, so they didn't go with that one. So A.L. Katz and Gilbert Adler, in specifics here, came across this script known as Dead Easy, and they decided to pick that one to be the second movie, and that was the title drop after the editing finalized on Demon Knight to be included in Demon Knight to be the second movie. Well, what ended up happening was they got pretty much the entire cast figured out, the script finalized. They packed everything that they needed to go to New Orleans to begin, setting up everything they need to record the movie and everything. And after 3 weeks of being in New Orleans, they get a call from Universal telling them that Dead Easy's been scrapped at the last minute, and they were to move to Vancouver, which is, in between Washington and Canada, to make a brand new movie they have never heard of called Bordello of Blood. Now, Bordello of Blood ended up getting made essentially because Robert Zemeckis, who was behind the whole Frighteners fiasco, decided that he was possibly going to move over to DreamWorks and take over, the film division for that company. And Universal wanted to twist Robert Zemeckis' arm to not go over there, so they decided to take his script of Bordello of Blood and essentially make that the second movie, along with some half-assed, testimony supposedly that they didn't really feel that there was enough faith in the Dead Easy script for it to be a worthwhile venture for them, and they thought Bordello of Blood would be a stronger movie. Well, as we all know, Bordello of Blood essentially killed the Tales from the Crypt Presents franchise, and we never got a third official film until the mid 2000s, when a film known as Ritual, which is a whole different rabbit hole, and I don't really want to get into too much of it in this video, but essentially There was a script for the film, which was a remake of a 1940s RKO Pictures film by Val Luton, called I Walked with a Zombie. And this was supposed to be a whole different spin off series from the creators of Tales from the Crypt, who, they founded Dark Castle, I think, Entertainment, which was essentially a bunch of remakes of, you know, I think it was William Castle horror movies or Roger Corman. I forget who it was. But those came to fruition, and they thought that maybe doing an RKO Pictures line of remakes would be also a worthwhile venture. But it fell through, and then they decided to possibly put some Tales from the Crypt stuff in there to release it as the quote unquote third movie to get it out there to fit the deal. But Universal decided to sell off the script and do away with the deal. The script ended up with Miramax, and so the story goes, they released it overseas after it was finished. And by the time it came to North America, they retroactively added Tales from the Crypt stuff into it to make it appear to be Tales from the Crypt related, and that's what ended up with Ritual. But nonetheless, this film, Dead Easy, wasn't the only scrap movie from the Tales from the Crypt Presents series that never got made. There was actually another third movie in the mix here, which had a few names, but the main one I see is called Body Count, and I believe a gentleman by the name of Adam Rifkin wrote the script and was going to be involved in making it. And it also has another name. I think it's called Redneck Frank. But so the story goes, that movie fell through because of the lack of faith, again, with Universal with the script. And after listening to the table read of Dead Easy here, which I'm shocked actually happened, but I'm really grateful it did happen, I would love to see Body Count get a table reading so we finally get a scope of all of these Tales from the Crypt Presents series associated movies directly and indirectly, um, to have some sort of release out there. And it's a shame because not a lot of people know that this exists. And if you're a massive Tales from the Crypt fan, click on the link that I put in the description and in the comment section of this video and go watch the whole thing before we get into the review of this unmade film here, because I think that once you listen to it, you're going to see all the appreciation I have for it here. And I'm going to say this up front before we go any further. I think they should have went with this one over Bordello of Blood. Even though I do have a soft spot for Bordello of Blood, and I think a lot of people have really warmed up on that movie over the years, I still would say that if I had to pick between this or Bordello of Blood on paper of what they should have made, I would have taken this. So with that being said, we have Dead Easy's table reading to talk about now. So what I was really impressed by was the fact that A.L. Katz and Gilbert Adler actually got on a lot of originally intended actors that were going to be in the film. Particularly, I think 4 actors stood out to me the most that were going to actually play pivotal roles in the movie. We have Jake Busey, who actually starred in an episode from Tales from the Crypt's later seasons, and he played a few characters here. Since it is a table reading, quite a few actors played multiple roles, so they didn't have to have a huge Zoom meeting to facilitate this. By the way, the Zoom meeting was pretty well done for what you would expect out of this. And it was hosted by, of course, Dad from the Crypt podcast, and he did a phenomenal job, introducing the actors and whatnot. But tangent aside, we had Jake Busey, and then we had the stars of the show here. We had, of course, the voice of the Crypt Keeper, John Kassir, playing the Crypt Keeper, but also playing the main villain of this movie, known as the Harlequin, and that was a treat to see. And then you have your 2 starring roles played by Sean Astin, who plays the main character Lloyd, and then Tia Carrere, I think that's how you say her name. I think I recognize her from the Wayne's World movies from the early 90s. She was going to play this psychic reporter in the movie. And there's a bunch of other actors that participated in this. I think Leslie Zemeckis also helped, lend some talent of hers in this table reading, and there's a few others that I'm blanking on their names, but um, yeah, off the bat, very cool that they got some original intended cast members to be involved in this table reading, which supposedly was for charity. And I'm hoping that they raised a lot of money because I think this was on Kickstarter and they got some crowdfunding for it, and all the proceeds did end up going to charity. So, congrats for them for that. But with that out the way, let's get into the story here. So, listening to the story, you're going to see that A.L. Katz is narrating, the background and the scenery and the scene changes and all that. He's also providing sound clips to kind of bring some ambiance to the scenes here and there too. But the movie starts out in the table reading with these two oil drillers in Louisiana somewhere, presumably outside of New Orleans, where this entire film would have taken place. And these two oil drillers, they end up drilling into the ground and finding this big hole cavern underneath the soil, and this of course jams up their drill. But when this happens, this possibly frees this being known as the Harlequin, as we'll get to see a lot of in this table reading, um, out of its, I guess, prison. And we see the Harlequin has a protoplasmic makeup on his body, and he immediately decides to kill some of these workers. Well, once this happens and this sets up, I guess, the precursor to the rest of the movie here, we then find ourselves meeting the main character of this movie, known as Lloyd. And Lloyd is played by Sean Astin, and he may or may not have some connections to an older gentleman that was also in the precursor event that I didn't mention. And he lives out in the middle of the swamp, and he overhears this huge ruckus and commotion nearby, and he sounds kind of mysterious, but you kind of have to roll with it because the movie's going to take some time for all these questions you have about this character to unfold. But let's just say Lloyd might be related to this older gentleman, as we find out later on. Well, anyways, Lloyd works for a video game company, and he has this eccentric boss who is kind of breathing down his neck about making his video games scarier and what have you. And Lloyd kind of finds that ironic, but he was like, all right, well, I'll work on it, I guess. And Lloyd, he has a 8-year-old son named Danny, and he, I guess, is a single father, and it's never really mentioned what happened to Danny's mother or anything, but we get a sense that Lloyd, he has a really cool job, and he's a family man, and he's pretty likable, right? But unbeknownst to him, nearby in, I guess, the French Quarter of New Orleans, there's this woman who is blind by cataracts, and her son, who's played by Jake Busey, uh, who are a part of this family called the Daroos, and they possibly have connections to the occult and like magic, voodoo, shamanism, and whatnot. And the older woman, who's played by Leslie Zemeckis, is, I guess, the mother of Jake Busey, and she is blind and she's using tarot cards, and she sees this vision pop up in braille on her card that freaks her out. And Jake Busey's character is like, all right, what's going on? And the mom is essentially like, uh, the Harlequin has come back, and we need to save Michael. And we don't know who Michael is, but as the movie goes along, you'll find out who it is. And of course, Jake Busey's character listens to his mom and thinks that if there's any evidence to point that the Harlequin might be back, then they should act on it and try to track down the Harlequin. But unbeknownst to them, it perhaps has already tried to get his hands on a particular character, and that is 8-year-old Danny in his home and residence. So when Lloyd heads home later that evening, he's talking with his son, who has essentially revealed to him that he has a new imaginary friend, but his imaginary friend doesn't want Danny talking to his father about him, and he's kind of scared of this thing. And Lloyd is like, all right, well, it's an imaginary friend. You're gonna be fine. These nightmares aren't real. Blah blah blah, and tries to coach Danny that everything's gonna be all right. Well, let's just say everything doesn't end all right for Danny, and he possibly has this very frightening interaction with the Harlequin, who is voiced by John Kassir himself. And John Kassir's character here may or may not be implied to have taken Danny's soul in life. And of course, we get caught up to speed very quickly after that, where Danny's having his funeral in a nearby cemetery, and we see his father, Lloyd, is going through the ringer and the emotions of losing his son, and he doesn't really know what to make of his son's sudden death. Well, we get a new character introduced around this point, who's played by Tia Carrere, who is a psychic reporter, and she's there recording, I guess, a commercial for her business, and she wants the grave of Danny and I guess the service to be in view to kind of offer legitimacy for her infomercial, which plays a role later on. Well, after this event happens, and of course, the camera crew causes a commotion at Danny's funeral and whatnot. We go back to the old lady and Jake Busey's character, and the old lady gets a sign about like a hanging man and whatnot, and Jake Busey's character, I guess, puts in the back of his mind that that should mean that he needs to go to this bar, I think known as the Hangman's Bar or something. And when he goes there, he's expecting that um, the Harlequin is there. Well, there was an event that happened, and I should mention this now. The Harlequin is trying to do a multitude of things at this point of the film, as we see that he's trying to do something with Danny in specifics with his soul, but also he needs to kill victims and steal their skin because his protoplasm and I guess magical abilities can only offer him temporary skin before it starts to decay and fall off. So he has to wear this full body mask, which resembles a harlequin, which I guess looks like a demented court jester or something like that. And mind you, this whole movie takes place around Mardi Gras, so I think Mardi Gras might have something to do with it because it's like a festival of the supernatural and the dead inherently. I think anyway. But anyways, he meets this. The Harlequin meets this woman at the bar, and he kind of takes advantage of her and steals her skin and brutally kills her, which gives him enough disguise to pass through Jake Busey's character without being detected. And because of that, the Harlequin kind of ups and disappears for a little while. Well, we get caught up with the psychic reporter who's also at the same time looking at her footage of the recording at the cemetery, and she sees, or I guess senses something was very odd in the situation and feels compelled to go talk with whoever this boy's father was, and she finds out that it ends up being Lloyd. And so she goes to Lloyd's house to meet with him and say, hey, look, I think I have a suspicion that your son might actually be alive. And of course, Lloyd is like, all right, whatever, you're just pulling my string here. But she makes her case saying that, I read energy. I need to use videos and what have you to see physical energy. But I'm telling you, there's something off about this. And if you want to believe me, we can go straight to, Danny's crypt that he was buried in. We can open up his coffin and see if he's actually dead. So her and Lloyd, of course, go to Danny's freshly buried crypt, and they pry open his casket with a crowbar and discover that his body's not in there, which sends Lloyd into a sense of disbelief, but now he has to put it aside because the psychic was right, and possibly his son is still out there alive, and he's now going to have to solve this mystery of what happened to his son's body, right? Well, as the story goes along, of course, Jake Busey and his mom's character kind of piece together that what they, saw previously was a sign to them. and essentially that there was a disguise used to trick Jake Busey's character into thinking that the Harlequin wasn't there at the bar that night, but in fact he was, and he still might be out there killing random people to take their skin and their appearance, and that's how he's getting around undetected, right? So they're armed with that information, but Lloyd and the psychic don't know this information yet. And for Lloyd and Tia Carrere's character, they immediately think that they need to start digging into the history here. But before they do so, Tia Carrere gets to know Sean Astin's character, and she seems to connect that Danny having an imaginary friend kind of relates to something that possibly is connected to Lloyd's past, but Lloyd says that he doesn't really remember anything before the age of 5, and he came from this orphanage. And she's like, I'm psychic. I can read your energy. There might be some answers at this orphanage for you. Maybe we should go there and get some possible information there. Well, they head to, Lloyd's orphanage, and of course, there was a scary looking nun from his childhood that was more than eager to help them and give them a file that was bequeathed to Lloyd when he arrived at the orphanage from his birth parents, essentially. And Lloyd, now having this folder, decides to open it with the psychic, and this jogs back a memory out in the swamp when they're, I guess looking around for this, I guess, mystic sign that I guess Lloyd had that kind of ties into his video game design previously, but I'm not really going to touch on that too much now. But essentially, his memory gets jogged, and he realizes that there's this photo that was given, and it mentions the Daru family. And we see, according to the script, a character that looks like a younger version of Jake Busey's character. Then, of course, a younger version of Leslie Zemeckis' character. And then there's this young version of supposedly Lloyd's real father. And Lloyd now remembers being dropped off by his dad there, and remembers that he did something to his head to kind of lose his memory of who he was before. And because of that, Lloyd now believes that he's an actual Daru, which we as the audience now know is that makes him related to these other two characters that keep cutting in and out of the story. Well, to make the long story short, the two of them realize that they need to go find more answers. And the only way to do so is possibly to go to Lloyd's childhood home to gather up any evidence or maybe something to help them with what they're about to face, because they do realize that this imaginary friend might actually have some more legitimacy to it. So they go to Lloyd's childhood home. They end up finding this thing called a pentacross, and the pentacross, as we see in the movie with the other Darus, they actually have some pentacrosses too. Might be the only physical way to handle the Harlequin character, right? So he grabs that, and then of course now he's armed with that. He's going to, I guess, be ready when he inevitably does meet the Harlequin. But let's just say a bunch of weird stuff starts convulging at this point of the story. And let's just say something happens with the Harlequin, and Lloyd sees firsthand what this being is. And it may or may not involve his long lost brother and his mother being brutally killed by the Harlequin, and the Harlequin disappears once Lloyd shows his pentacross, right? And because of the aspect of the psychic needing like physical, I guess, video or some sort of graphic evidence of somebody's existence to have a psychic reading, he decides to go back to his video game headquarters and call his boss in to give him access to the software so that he can program parts of the Harlequin into the system. So that way the psychic can have, I guess, GPS tracking on the Harlequin's whereabouts, because they have no idea where he's gone, and he's possibly the person behind where Danny is, and could be the imaginary friend that not only haunted Lloyd as a young child, but his son Danny. And there's a close call with him almost losing his pentacross and what have you there. And of course, his boss might get brutally slain by the Harlequin, who's, I guess, trying to track down Lloyd to kill him. And they fortunately are able to escape, right? After narrowly, fighting off the Harlequin themselves. And they end up at a point where they possibly interact with the old man that we haven't seen since the beginning of the movie that was out in the swamp, who ends up being Lloyd's biological father. And from this point, Lloyd's biological father drops a bombshell about the Daru family and their origins perhaps being in shaman magic, and reveals that he is the oldest of the clan and he has the family's power wielded. But if something were to happen to him, Lloyd is the next in line and he's going to inherit the power. And it's important that he knows this information about the Harlequin and possibly what he's doing. And he drops his whole backstory essentially about how the Harlequin might be closer to the family than they all had believed, or at least Lloyd and the psychic beforehand. And it's possible that it could be, Lloyd's own grandfather's soul who turned himself into a Harlequin after being taken out of his life by his own son, who's Lloyd's father. And it's revealed that his father did this to his own dad because he had the family power and grew evil with it, and he wanted the family to be clear of that problem. But once he solved that problem and Lloyd was born, after a few years, around the time where Lloyd had to be sent to the orphanage, his father's soul had decided to become a Harlequin and raised from hell, I guess, to come back to the mortal realm and steal a soul of his own descendant to sacrifice in a pit, so that way the blood sacrifice will give him a physical body and he's reintegrated back into his family power. But as a Harlequin, he'll have, I guess, double the power, I guess. Well, what ended up happening is he ended up protecting Lloyd by erasing his memory and putting him in the orphanage, kind of masking his identity to the Harlequin. And he ended up imprisoning the Harlequin underground, but the Harlequin was freed by the oil rig people in the beginning of the movie, which caused this whole event thing to happen, right? So, with that information, Lloyd and his father and the psychic decide that they need to go find Danny, and they seemingly know where he would be because he would need a pit. It makes logical sense that he would go back to the pit that he was imprisoned in the beginning of the movie. And we see that Danny is possibly still there in the pit, but the Harlequin is there, and there needs to be a climactic battle with Lloyd and his dad to save Danny's life. And let's just say something happens to Lloyd's dad, and the power is now put into Lloyd's hand, and he has to find a way to defeat the Harlequin and save his own son, which may or may not end up happening. But because this is Tales from the Crypt, there's a twist at the end that implies that somebody, by the end of the film, due to what happened in the climax, might be potentially a Harlequin themselves. And that's where I'll leave it. Because I want you all to go experience the table reading for yourself and experience the story. But that, in a nutshell, is what you're going to expect out of this unmade film here, dead easy. So, with that out the way, I have a lot of positives with this table reading of this script here. I thought all the acting performances, or I guess the voice performances of all the actors involved, were great, especially for table reading standards, and from them having to navigate Zoom of all places to record this, and the fact that they probably had little to not a lot of time to prepare character work. This shit ruled. None of them gave a bad performance. Yeah, there was some weird, interrupting at times and, them kind of stuttering over their lines here and there. But that's to be expected in something as live as it is. I mean, this is like a one take thing. So for what they were able to accomplish with a one take recording was incredible. And I have really no complaints there. Even Ale Katz, narrating and guiding us through the story and kind of painting in our minds what the scenery looks like in New Orleans, in Louisiana, and how these characters are, strewn about in their daily lives or in the moment or what have you. It was great stuff. Even the sound effects that he decided to include to kind of liven up the story in some parts was incredible, and I really appreciated that about this reading here. Um, which brings me to the story. I thought the story had some compelling characters. You would think that this film would have, some tropes going on with characters that you notice in Tales from the Crypt, but this really reminded me of some ambiguous characters that are more enigmas that are intriguing, akin to something like they had in Demon Knight with like Breaker, for example. Um, except I would say Lloyd, the psychic. I mean, all the characters in here had fun enough personalities, and especially Lloyd's whole journey through the movie I think was very captivating. And seeing him go through all the ups and downs that he does in the story makes him a really rootable protagonist. And his whole backstory with his family being associated with the Harlequin phenomenon, I thought was brilliant. There is a negative with that, and I'll get into that soon. But I really liked the characters here in this movie. And I thought they explored some ideas that I've never really seen in films before done this cleverly. So I had to tip my hat to whoever wrote this script. I don't know who did, but uh, I can see why the producers wanted this script to be turned into a Tales from the Crypt movie. Um, it's really good when it comes to the characters, especially the villain, the Harlequin, played by John Cassier. He was a scene chewer. And I can tell you this from the sound of it, this film, if it was turned into an actual movie, would have had some killer gore like Demon Knight and some badass looking prosthetic effects and possibly warped body horror going on. And I would have been all there for it. I mean, seeing John Cassier play this role and just having the time of his life, it looks like, um, recording this was incredible. It was just something about it made me really want to see these characters on screen and see what it would have looked like. Because I'm telling you, the atmosphere, the character writing, it's all here. The gore, everything you could possibly want in a Tales from the Crypt story, it would have been here. Um, and yeah, when it comes to these Tales from the Crypt Presents movies, they're known for their batshit and wild climaxes. This would have had that. Possibly would have been mildly CGI given some parameters of it, but there's some legit moments in this movie, especially by the climax, that when you hear it and try to visualize it, that shit probably would have been scary as hell. So, yeah, I mean, and going to the twist, even while it's mildly confusing with one aspect of it, and I'll get into that in the negatives, the twist was even cool. And it left some open-ended things on the table, and it really registered with me, and I was like, yeah, I mean, they had a pretty much a home run idea here for this to be a Tales from the Crypt movie. Now, when we get to my negatives of it, I guess I'll go ahead and bring these two up because these are my two real negatives with the film, but they are kind of big. The first thing that I think I should bring up here is the whole film feels like a big plot convenience thing, if I'm being honest. Everything feels too neat and tied together for my liking. There's no event in the movie that doesn't play into the origin of the Harlequin, which, on paper is cool. But in a film like this, where you have such a deep backstory to all of this phenomenon and possibly being tied to Mardi Gras and possibly using video games in the mix, there's elements like using the video game technology that I feel go a little bit wasted here, and they kind of go into the stretching the believability department, especially with the psychic played by Tia Carrere, and how Lloyd tries to program the Harlequin into a video game using software and I guess, pieces of the Harlequin to make GPS for the psychic. I mean, that just sounds fucking stupid, right? And it really is. And that part of the story really isn't needed. If I'm being honest, I guess they wanted to capitalize more on the video game stuff and building up another death with Lloyd's boss, which I think is cool. But nonetheless, you really didn't need that aspect to find the Harlequin. I mean, there's this whole thing about this red truck that I didn't really cover in the plot review, but this red truck possibly would have been something that Lloyd put in the video game, and possibly could have been, in a flashback memory of his dad driving it, and they see this truck in and out of the movie a couple times. That's what they should have built on more than the video game stuff. I don't know why it's in here, but if they would have possibly tweaked that instead of using the red truck, I would have been fine either way. But like I said, everything feels very plot convenience ish, and there's some things that happen in the film that don't really make much sense logically. You just have to roll with it, because if you spend too much time trying to explain things or what have you, I guess you'll run the risk of over explaining, which is fine. But some of this stuff just sounds a little too far fetched, even given the parameter that I'm already putting disbelief out the door with it. Which leads me to my last negative with the movie, and this is about the twist. Like I said, I do like the twist, but there's some aspect to it that kind of makes sense and kind of doesn't. There's this whole aspect of how a Harlequin becomes a thing in the movie, and it involves like a soul trying to, I guess, garner power and make a deal, I guess, to come back to the physical realm. But whoever ends up becoming a hypothetical Harlequin, or at least implied to be one, it's never really expounded on how their origin is legitimately different than the Harlequin we got to meet in the movie. So how are they a Harlequin? If it's even them being a Harlequin, I mean, what does the twist actually imply for this character? Is it them being their own Harlequin? Is it the former Harlequin possessing them? I don't know. It's just up in the air, and I guess it's supposed to be like that because it's a twist and it's supposed to be the actual end of the story. But given everything else we got, I think where it ends leaves too many questions on the table. And when you think back to the events and the revelations in the previous events of the movie, things just don't really add up too much logically. And because of that, I think that does hurt the twist in some semi-significant ways. But with that being said, those are really my only negatives with the film. And if I am being honest with myself, I really did enjoy this movie. I'm going back and forth whether if I like the table reading just as much as I like the film Demon Knight. But if I'm being honest, I don't have the leisure of watching what this movie would have looked like. So I can't really give this the same score that I gave Demon Knight, which I believe was a 4 out of 5 stars. But where I settled with this, given the problems I had, I decided to give it a little bit of a notch down and give it just a flat good, but a high one at a 3.75 out of 5 stars. I think this is a good table script reading. I also think this is a good script for a film. If this was ever turned into a movie, I'd be one of the first people to buy tickets for it, and I'll be massively supporting it. And it sucks that we never got it. And yeah, it made me sad of that realization, but I'm also happy that they took the time to table read this, and I'm glad that there is a version of this story out there for us Tales from the Crypt fans to enjoy at the very least. And this gets a high recommend. If you're a Tales from the Crypt fan or Tales from the Crypt Presents movie fan specifically, you need to go check out this table reading. Like I said, there's a link down in the comment section and in the description down below for you to go do so. Go give it some support and see what this lost film was like. And let's hope that we can get another one in the future for Body Count, aka Redneck Frank, because Lord knows I would like to see that. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Tales from the Crypt Presents Dead Easy. Let me know down in the comment section if you're able to listen to this table reading of this Unmade movie. What did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.